Welcome back to Caregiving Club's Newscast. This is episode 11, and we're dropping this right at the end of July. So we're in the middle of summer. Hopefully you're all enjoying your summer and travel plans and celebrating America's 250th birthday. I'm Sherri Snelling. I'm your host and a corporate gerontologist, author, and CEO of the Caregiving Club. So in this episode 11, as I mentioned in our last episode, in July every year, the Alzheimer's Association holds their international conference where they bring in worldwide researchers and talk about the latest research, the latest programs and best practices. It's really, the end all be all of what's going on in Alzheimer's. So we're going to share a whole lot of news that came out of that conference for you. A lot of it is in our caregiver wellness segment. What we're going to look at is lifestyle factors. We're going to show you what's the latest information. Also neuroplasticity, which is all about building new brain cells. And one research study says we can do that well into our 90s. We're also going to look at vitamin D. What role does that play in Alzheimer's? As well as tau, tangles, which is one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's that doesn't get a lot of attention, but it may just be the new focus for preventing or slowing the disease. We'll discuss that. And then we'll also take a look at something called microglia. These are your immunity cells in your brain that help protect the blood-brain barrier, and they play a critical role in Alzheimer's. And we're going to tell you why researchers are now looking at microglia in a very different way. And then when we turn to our Well Home Design news, the FDA just recently approved a new drug therapy that's for people who have mild cognitive impairment. So this is kind of pre-Alzheimer's or early stage Alzheimer's, but it's a drug therapy you can do at home. You don't have to do it in a clinical setting. Very interesting. We're going to explain. And then also we're going to take a look at an award-winning program that is bringing us Christmas in July. It's all about creating a dementia-friendly holiday. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. When we turn to our caregiving in the workplace, we're going to go back to Sandwich Generation Month, which is also in July, because Care.com just dropped a phenomenal survey around the sandwich generation, and particularly as it relates to work, but also, what are the things we don't know about the sandwich generation? How do we help them? What are the programs and solutions? And it has to do with both work and home. So we've got to look at those two things as very critical when it comes to sandwich generation support. Also in the workplace, we have a really interesting study about happiness as we age. Does it have more to do with money, or does it have to do with friends? You probably know the answer to that, but I think you'll be interested in the study anyway. And then finally, in our pop culture segment, we have some sad news from a hero from the Miracle on the Hudson. That's Captain Sully Sullenberger, for those of you who don't remember, in 2009, who miraculously landed a plane on the Hudson River. We'll talk a little bit about that. He was one of the heroes that I wrote about in my book, Time Monday. But he just recently announced that he has early stage Alzheimer's, and how he's going to navigate this new journey. That's our pop culture segment. So as always, we hope that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, because in addition to this newscast, which we drop every couple of weeks, we've got great interviews with experts on our podcast, Caregiving Club on Air. We're also doing a lot of our Self-Care in 7 Minutes videos. So those are how-tos from my book on caregiver self-care and me time. And we also do some on-demand educational webinars that you can watch for free, and lots of other interesting content on that YouTube channel. So make sure you hit the subscribe button, and please follow us on YouTube and also our social media as well. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into our caregiver wellness news. So as I mentioned, for our Caregiver Wellness News, we're going to focus a lot on all of the news and headlines that came out of the Alzheimer's Association International Conference in London just a couple weeks ago. So this is very fresh for you. There's a lot we want to go over. Normally I have about 1.5 pages of notes. I got 4 pages of notes, so we're going to skim over these, but we will have links on our episode guide page. So if you want to dive into some of the articles that I researched or other bits of this news, we'll have those for you. So let's start out with, first of all, I think we all know, because several years ago, the Lancet Commission together a group of researchers who took a look at pretty much all the research that was out there at the time on Alzheimer's and determined that about 40% of all of the Alzheimer's cases or adults that are diagnosed today could be reduced because of lifestyle factors. So we know that there can be some genetic connections, although typically that's more in what we call early onset Alzheimer's. So something that you would get more in your 30s, 40s, 50s, or early 60s. Whereas everything that you might get from dementia as an older person could be more related to our lifestyle choices. And it's the typical, eat well, move more, don't smoke, be social, uh, you know, make sure you're managing your hearing and your eyesight. All of these things are now starting to come out. The five senses, of course, all working together in the brain. All of these things are being looked at. But here's what a new study. So let's say, okay, so that's the baseline. We know we have to do better on, things like keeping hypertension down. That's one of the big ones. And BMI and obesity, another big one. But this research came out of UC Davis. And they said these are some of the things that we should think about before the age of 70. So this is for younger generations. And by younger generations, I mean like starting in your 20s, starting in your adult, your adult phase, if you will, because the last part of our brain to form is the frontal temporal lobes. And those are typically completed by your late, sometimes mid, but late 20s. And once that's done, the brain starts to age from that point on. So even in our late 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever, we can start to adopt some of these things. Now, it doesn't mean that if you're in your 50s, it's like, well, forget it. I've already missed out on 30 years of doing the right thing, so it's not going to make any difference. No, that's not true, because we can always make a difference and make significant health changes when we adopt, kind of these new lifestyle things. So here's what this study was all about. So it was almost 1,000 participants. As you know, I take a look at the methodology because I like to bring you studies and research that has some significant validity to it. Very often, if you're only taking a look of a group of people who maybe it's 100 people or 200 people, or maybe it's only men or only women, unless it's a women's health study. But, when you have those types of things, it's hard to then say, well, this relates to the whole population. So 1,000 is usually our threshold, which this was. The mean age, that's like an average age, but it's the mean age of the cohort in this study was 68 years old. Okay, so almost 70. And almost 62%, 61.9% were women, which makes a lot of sense because more women than men, as we know, develop Alzheimer's. So it does make sense to maybe give a little bit more significance percentage-wise to women being in a study because they are the ones that typically are diagnosed. Now, so all of these people underwent an MRI, just to give a baseline. And then they had 2 follow-up visits, 12 months and 24 months. So this is a 2-year basic study. And what they showed is that these lifestyle interventions can help slow changes in the brain in the white matter that is associated with aging and cognitive design. Now, a lot of us know white matter, gray matter. We have 2 different colors, if you will, of matter in our brains. So what's the difference? Well, white matter changes. White matter is how you transmit messaging in the brain. Gray matter is how you process it. So they have to work in conjunction with each other. But the white matter is really important, and it's really tied to Alzheimer's because it's the one pushing the messages out to the rest of the body. Remember to drink water, do you remember this memory, whatever. It's the one pushing all of those messages out. So when that's impacted, and it usually is associated with Alzheimer's disease, as you have lower white matter in your brain. That's something that they look at. So that is what they looked at in the study. And what they found is that the white matter changes are often less emphasized than memory-related brain changes, but they're closely linked to vascular health. So that's your blood vessels. That's your that's the thing that could potentially lead to things like a stroke. And very often, people who have a stroke will experience some kind of cognitive decline, or we will see people who have heart health issues have also, the potential for risk for Alzheimer's because of the pressure on the blood vessels, and also closely linked to cognitive function. Okay, so what they found is that when you do more movement, more physical activity, when you do address your diet, like follow a MIND diet, which is a variation of the Mediterranean diet, when you do engage in brain exercises, this is very important, and social engagement, interaction, and you're taking care of cardiovascular health. So you're watching your blood pressure, you're making sure that you're taking care of things like BMI and obesity and all those things, then it can have an effect on the brain, and it can prevent and lower your Alzheimer's risk. And what they found is that when you join a structured program, so they had two different things to the study. One was structured, where you followed, the instructions of like somebody who was leading different exercises or giving you recipes or whatever it was, versus self-guided. You were given the information, and then you had to do it on your own. The structured actually worked better. Now, personally, I will tell you that relates to me, because I'm the type of person that I need to go take a class. I need somebody to tell me, do 5 more push-ups or whatever it is. I'm not very good on that self-guided discipline. So it sounds like this would have helped for me too, but it's a structured program. If they did the structured program, the people in this study slowed their aging, and that includes the brain aging, by 1 to 2 years. Okay. So that's pretty significant. That's something to take a look at. Now, moving on to another study, which I found really fascinating, is, very often we think after age 60, you're over the cliff, it's too late, you can't really do much. Let's just, let it all go. But you can't. And one of the things that we need to recognize and understand about our brains is there's something called neuroplasticity. Now, this is something that researchers only really discovered about 30 years ago. And now it's starting to gain a lot of traction, because neuroplasticity is tied very closely to brain exercises, not brain games, by the way. Brain games are different, and they work out usually only one part of your brain. Brain exercises, it's just like working out your body. You wouldn't just do a bicep on one arm and that's it, right? You're going to balance it. You're going to do the other arm, and then maybe you're going to do some tricep stuff, and maybe you'll do some sit-ups, but it's a whole body workout. Well, the brain has to be seen in that kind of context as well. You don't just work out one region of the brain. You've got to work out numerous regions of the brain to really get what we call neuroplasticity, which is where you're building these new connections between the neurons, and you're keeping them active, right? Which is very important, because the more that they just sit there and they atrophy, that is normal aging, and it can impact your cognitive performance and your executive functioning. And then in Alzheimer's, we know the cells start to die on their own because of the tau tangles and beta amyloid plaque, and you're losing that, they're dying, and they're losing those brain cells. So the more we can build more brain cells and build better neuro connections, that is going to help us as we age. And you can do that into your 90s. So you don't need to say, well, I'm in my 70s. Do I really need to do this? Yes, you do. If you want to stay cognitively functioning, absolutely. So here's what the University of Texas at Dallas study found. It was a 3-year study, 4,000 adults, really good. Age range, fantastic. Age 19 to 94. Wow, what a cohort. And they wanted to show that, it's not just young people who can do this, or it's not just people in their middle life, it's people in their 80s and 90s. And they did show it. Okay. So they did 5 to 15 minutes a day of brain training. Okay. And then they found that the strongest predictor of improvement was the engagement, staying engaged, regardless of age, gender. If you could just stick with it, then you're going to build those neuroplasticity, connections. And the study reminds us that our brain is not defined by age, it is defined by possibility. I love that quote from the study. But what that tells us is that brain exercises are critical. For those of you who are really great physically exercising. Don't forget your brain. You've got to add it. For those of you who, like me, maybe aren't, woo, let's go run a marathon tomorrow. Maybe not the best at physical activity and all that kind of stuff. You can still do these brain games 5 minutes a day, which, by the way, I love because that fits right into my Me Time Monday book. Okay. 7 minutes a day or less on something that's going to help you is what we're looking at, right? So now we can add the brain exercise into maybe one of those days or a couple, 3 days during the week or whatever it is. But it's not that hard to do. Moving on from that, talking about 90-year-olds, super agers is now this new group, if you will, of older adults. And so we know that people who are 100 are called centenarians. We know that people who live into their 80s and 90s are now called super agers. So you may see that out there in news headlines. The super agers are here. And there's a lot of research. There's some people that are followed in the sports world who do marathons in their 80s and 90s and other things. And it's just fantastic. But anyway, so what this new study found is that they were looking at, do super agers have a genetic like adverse or less risk, let's say, for the Alzheimer's gene? Do we see less APOE, 4 levels or activity or whatever it happens to be in these super agers? So we're kind of looking at that. Like, is that why they're still performing in their 80s and 90s like someone who has a 50s or 60-year-old brain? Because that's really what we see with super agers. They're cognitively sharp, super sharp. We all know them. People are 80 and 90s and, they could knock your socks off. So they were looking for that, the researchers. But here's what's interesting. They didn't find what they thought. They thought maybe there would be some kind of a genetic, a chromosome, here, flip this switch, and this is why these people are so sharp, into their later years. They didn't really find that. But what they did find, and what they did reveal in the study is that a lot of these super agers are doing all the things that we just talked about lifestyle-wise. So they have, for many years, been socially engaged. They're still working. They're still out there. They're volunteering. They're taking care of their bodies. They're taking care of their brains. They're doing things that are going to exercise their brain. So they felt like, they've found that, no, there really isn't something special in these super agers when it comes to genetics. It is really about lifestyle. And I think that just gives more proof to the lifestyle being so powerful in terms of how we protect our brains and perform at our peak, as we will, well into our later decades. Now, another study that I thought was interesting was in the Lancet Healthy Longevity. It was an article. It was research published in there. And they were looking at global risk factors. And what they found is globally, there are different risk factors, or let's just say of the Lancet 14 lifestyle factors, in some countries, certain factors had more significance than maybe here in America. And let me explain that a little bit. So, for instance, in China, they found that a lower education level had a much higher percentage of becoming a risk for Alzheimer's in Chinese people versus here in America, which, yes, education is very important, but it was lower. In America, what they found is that hypertension, so that's high blood pressure, that is not managed, by the way, by any kind of medication, smoking, either a former smoker or a current smoker. So even if you smoked and gave it up back in your 30s, and by the way, smoking very often now includes vaping. And I know vaping has been so popular among our younger generations, and they feel like it's safe. It's not. We've now proven through a lot of research that it may not be as detrimental to your health as nicotine, but it is still detrimental. It still has what we call deleterious effects on your brain. High LDL cholesterol. Okay, so that's one we got to watch. Your cholesterol is broken into the HDL and LDLs. You want to watch that ADL number. Obesity, which is kind of tied a little bit maybe to your cholesterol, but being obese and physically inactive, being very sedentary. Those were the 5 top things among US people that they can do that should be modified that will reduce their Alzheimer's risk. So I thought, again, that's just another kind of a confirmation on how important it is of the choices we have in life to keep ourselves brain healthy. And then the study was interesting. So it was all about vitamin D. Now, we know vitamin D is very powerful. And, it's known as the sunshine vitamin, if you will, because it boosts serotonin. Now, serotonin starts in our microbiome. It doesn't start in our brain like a lot of other happiness hormones I talk about, like oxytocin, endorphins, dopamine. Those all start in the brain, and they are sent out to the body through the brain. The serotonin starts in your gut. So it starts in your microbiome. So it is actually very tied to what you eat and nutrition, but it's also tied to the absorption through our skin, through our eyes, through everything of sunshine. And that includes what we eat that's touched by the sun. So again, a lot more leafy greens or a lot more fruits and veggies that are obviously grown out in the sunshine, being out in the sunshine. And what I find really interesting about this is that one thing we know about people with Alzheimer's disease is that their circadian rhythms are thrown off. So their light and dark cycles are opposite, where we are up and active during light time, and then we're sleepier and we, go to sleep and repair our muscles and our brain during sleep at nighttime. Alzheimer's people are very drowsy and sleepy during the day and then very active at night. So it really is the opposite. So the circadian rhythms are already thrown off. Sleep disturbance is thrown off, obviously, because we want them to sleep during the night and they're not. And then we also know something called sundowning happens in the mid stage of Alzheimer's, and that happens in the afternoon as we see dusk. As the light starts to fade, we have a lot of paranoia and agitation and issues that come up that are part of sundowning. So all of this is very interesting, and the researchers are really on top of this. But vitamin D does play a key role then in all of these things. We don't have a lot of the answers yet, but here's what this one study found. This was done in the UK. And so it found people who had higher vitamin D levels in midlife. So we're talking about 40s and 50s, right? That's midlife. They had less of the Alzheimer's tau protein in their brains. Now, tau, again, all of us have tau, and it is part of the function of the brain. But where it becomes dysfunctioning in the brain is for Alzheimer's patients is because the tau that is inside the brain, the neuron, right? So the tau's inside, it starts to get tangled. Then you got the beta amyloid. That's the plaque, right? That's the yucky plaque block and everything. That starts on the outside of the neuron of the brain cell, but eventually it works its way into the brain cell as well. But the tau is inside the brain cell, and it gets all tangled if you have Alzheimer's. And one of the things that we know is that more women, or women more than men, we have more tau in our brain. So again, that could be a factor for our risk. We also know that tau accumulates earlier in disease stages. So if we start to see that people have lower levels of vitamin D and higher levels of tau, and they're in their 30s, this could be a warning signal. Like, we got to do something about this, because this could be a pathway to ultimately an Alzheimer's diagnosis years later. And so this study looked at 800 people, and they didn't look at them in a clinical setting. They took the data out of an existing study called the Framingham Heart Study. A lot of researchers do this. There are certain studies out there that are huge, that have huge numbers of people involved, that look at every single thing you could possibly think about. For this one, it would be every single thing you can think about that's related to the heart. But the heart, of course, is very related to the brain. And so the researchers can go in and they can dig through the data, and they can see, okay, look at how this pattern is getting set up among all these people. So that's how they did this particular study. The average age of the people that they looked at, their data, was 39, okay, midlife, dementia-free. So they had a brain scan, but then 16 years later, they had another brain scan. And a good number of these people were showing if they had lower vitamin D levels, which was data that they could mine from the study, then they had the higher risk and maybe showing early signs of Alzheimer's. So, we know vitamin D reduces inflammation. Inflammation is that's the big bear that we need to tackle. That's the big monster now in chronic disease is inflammation. You got to keep inflammation down in the body. Some of that has to relate to stress and cortisol. Other has to relate to your diet, nutrition, your movement and all of those things. But it is easier to detect earlier in life. So you want to make sure you're getting enough vitamin D. And how do you do that? As I said, get outside, get into nature, do your 5-minute walk around the neighborhood in the sunshine. That'll give you your vitamin D. And if it's during the winter months or you live in a geographic region that doesn't see a lot of sunshine, you've got to use your supplements. You've got to get more of that omega-3 fatty fish like salmon into your diet. You've got to get eggs into your diet. Eggs are making a comeback, by the way. I'm so excited. Eggs are great for vitamin D and for lowering inflammation. And then maybe even try like light therapy lamps because that can help as well. But it's just something to think about because it's playing a factor now in your Alzheimer's risk. Um, and then there was a new drug. Okay, so most of the drug research that's been done over the last 20, 30 years has been on beta amyloid plaque, right? It's why a lot of people call Alzheimer's diabetes 3 because of the plaque and the plaque like that's in your arteries, and the stuff that builds up with insulin resistance that comes with diabetes. All of these things are kind of related to each other, and plaque can get into the brain. So a lot of the research has gone to that. But when I was working at an academic medical center here in Southern California, I worked very, very closely with all of the key scientists and clinicians who were focusing on Alzheimer's, who were focusing on brain health. It was the world's largest repository for brain scans worldwide, so we could start to use AI to see patterns in how we might, fight some of these brain diseases like Alzheimer's. So it was a really fascinating time for me. And there was a researcher that we had there. And I remember talking to him several times, and he was kind of a little bit at the time, because this is a while ago. I wouldn't say out in the wilderness, but he was definitely a front runner on tau. He's like, forget beta amyloid. Everyone's kind of wasted their time. Tau is the target. And he was very, very, his name was Paul Eisen, for those of you who know the dementia world, if you will, of researchers. And he's a phenomenal worldwide renowned researcher. But he was really focused on tau. And now it's coming to be that we're seeing so much more of this attention on tau. And so Biogen, which is one of the big pharmaceuticals that is very invested in Alzheimer's disease and brain health, they did their own study. So this is not done by any of the clinical researchers per se. It's done by the Biogen researchers. And they included people who have mild cognitive impairment, that's MCI, or early stage Alzheimer's. And what they found, so they have this new drug that attacks the tau tangles, and it's a spinal cord shot. Doesn't sound fun, but if you think it might help you, it might be worth it. And the good news is you only have to do it twice a year. But what was really interesting is the lowest dose given they did this big, huge study and had different groups. They gave different dosages at different frequencies and times. The group that got the shot twice a year, lowest dose, had the best performance in beating back tau. They reduced their cognitive decline by 26%. That's huge, really. That's pretty big. And there was no brain inflammation because a lot of the beta amyloid drugs out there that help, quote unquote, prevent or slow the disease, you can have some brain inflammation, which then you either can't continue taking that drug or it causes other problems. So no brain inflammation. And anyway, so it has some really remarkable findings. Now they have to do more because they only had about 400 people in the study. But they really do believe that this is now starting to show maybe this is the direction. Maybe this is what we need to definitely put more money behind. And they felt like, this was going to help us also with the blood-brain barrier, which is the protective layer around the brain. Okay. Now, when you have hypertension, you have blood vessels. You have 400 miles of blood vessels in your brain. Can you imagine that? You know how teeny tiny those blood vessels are? If you have hypertension, the blood is being pumped and it's the walls of those vessels are thinning and they could have a burst, and that could mean you suffer a stroke or, other issues. Or your hypertension could be building up the plaque. Anyway, it's getting to the point where it could actually be risky for the blood-brain barrier, which brings a whole lot of other toxins into the brain. So it's all bad. So microglia, and I'm doing a little science show here just to show what I learned in my gerontology classes. But microglia are the immunity cells in your brain that fight and protect. They fight the toxins and they protect the blood-brain barrier. But here's what happens. This is interesting. So now researchers are starting to focus on microglia because if, let's say, you get a little bit of tau inside your neurons, you've got some beta amyloid plaque that has been developing in your brain, and you've got maybe hypertension and things are all going wrong, the microglia is like sending the defenders out. They're like, send the army over there. Go get that. And what's happening is maybe they're leaving other sections of the brain exposed, or they're having a surge of microglia. So many people sent out to save, the day, and all of a sudden it creates this cascade of other problems. Anyway, the bottom line is microglia could be something we want to look at in terms of the blood-brain barrier in making sure that they don't get overactive. Because when they get overactive, then we're starting to see some other issues in terms of the blood-brain barrier being permeated and also just your cognitive performance. So this was a study that's actually being done in animals right now, has not obviously been studied in humans. So we've got a ways to go. But at the University of Kentucky, what they're finding is that when these immune cells try or attempt to respond to the plaque and the tau tangles, they're ending up disrupting the rest of the brain and letting the blood-brain barrier be again exposed. And so it's also related to sleep. So when the microglia get too overactive, sleep disturbances happen. And that's maybe why a lot of Alzheimer's folks can't sleep at night, because the microglia is all, they're fighting their wars up there in your brain and they won't let you go to sleep. So lots of interesting stuff, just things to think about for our own health, but all the things that are within our hands we should do. Doesn't mean we're going to prevent Alzheimer's. I mean, I take a look at somebody like Sully, who we're going to talk about in pop culture. He's fit. He's obviously got tremendous cognitive and executive functioning. It probably did everything right. Now, I don't know about his lifestyle. I don't know if he smoked or drank, or if his hearing and it was going and he wasn't managing that, or what, whatever. All these other things we think about. But you just look at him and you think like, wow, that's a guy who's staying pretty fit into his 70s and still got diagnosed. So, there's a lot of things that we're still trying to figure out, but at least we can help ourselves out. So with that, let's go ahead and turn to Well Home Design News. All right. So for our Well Home Design News, we are going to stay on this Alzheimer's theme that we've got going for this episode. And I mentioned in our intro that the FDA has just recently approved of actually taking one of the drugs, Leqembi, which you may be familiar with, that can be used by people who have MCI. So that's mild cognitive impairment. That's not yet Alzheimer's, but it's kind of brain cognitive performance is declining and certain things that you see that are somewhat more mild. Or early stage Alzheimer's patients can also take this. But normally you would have to go into a clinical setting like an immunotherapy center and get an IV drip. They also, of course, have had what they call subcutaneous, but that's a shot. And that was approved for being taken in the home for maintenance. So you'd have to go do 6 months of your original therapy sessions to then be able to take this shot at home. Well, what's changed is the FDA has now proved that from the very get-go, so from the very beginning, you can either do an IV drip at home or you can do the shot. Now, for a lot of people, and also for those of us who are family caregivers, we're not nurses, we're not trained. You can administer it as a family member, but obviously I advise getting well trained by the nursing staff, maybe even for the first couple of months having home health come in if you can get home health that will help you and again help train you. And then you may be able to take it over. But if you just feel like, okay, I don't want to become the nurse, I'd rather just be the person who talks to my loved one, who helps them. We have meals together, but I don't want to move into that role of nurse. And a lot of family caregivers do feel that way. Then you want to have professional help come in. And usually that's what we call home health. Because if you just have home care is more about helping somebody get dressed, helping somebody eat, maybe preparing their meal, maybe helping them get into the bathroom, but it's not giving shots, it's not doing wound care, it's not doing any kind of physical therapy. Those are all typically done by outside healthcare agencies, either through home health or rehabilitation or whatever. So you just have to be aware of that. But it was kind of interesting because it has been approved, and this makes it a lot easier, certainly, because it is tough on the family caregivers. I remember when my stepdad, who had acute myeloid leukemia, so he had to have a lot of immunotherapy with the types of drugs that he was taking, and he'd have to go in pretty frequently, and there'd be flights. Like he'd have to go in, I can't remember if it was every week for like 3 months, and then you're off for a little bit or whatever. So it'd be like a 12-week flight or whatever. My mom had to be there, and she or I would be the ones that would take him or pick him up or whatever. Sometimes stay with him because sometimes the immunotherapy would take about an hour, hour and a half, sometimes take a little longer. But anyway, that's kind of what you're facing. So you have to just, based on your lifestyle, your relationship, how all that is, if you're working or not, how you're going to manage that. But being able to do it at home would make it a lot easier, right? It just puts more burden on the family caregiver to get trained and to do things properly, because that's the one thing that we want to all make sure that we're doing. Now, the other thing in Well Home Design is, this is a short segment because we did so much in Caregiver Wellness News, by the way. But there were some mature aging awards that were being given out, and a nonprofit group called Dementia-Friendly America, which is actually part of US Aging. Now, I've talked about US Aging in the past. US Aging is a national network of all of the local area agencies on aging. So in most counties across the country, we have a local area agency on aging. And that is both online, but also you can call and you can get some help with services like, okay, does Medicare cover this and where do I find it? Or, sometimes they'll make referrals, but very often they aren't necessarily going to tell you, well, this is better than this. They will just tell you all your options, and you still have to do some work. You still have to be the one that researches it or gets some other expert advice, which, by the way, you can get through a senior care expert like a geriatric care manager. And a lot of employers now are starting to bring on patient navigators, caregiving navigators that will help you determine what is best for you. But Area Agency on Aging is a great resource because they can tell you, yes, there's a Meals on Wheels service in your area, here's the number. Or they can say to you, if your loved one lives in a rural area, there isn't a Meals on Wheels for 20 miles, but there's another group called X, and they're only about, within 5 miles of your mom or dad or whatever it is. So they are very, very helpful. And they also can point you to different, whether it's federal programs or statewide or even local city and county programs that can help you save money, which is really big, right? So they can say to you, well, have you already looked at this, or have you tapped into your veterans benefits? So in that sense, they become very valuable. Now, that's what the area agencies on aging do. And US Aging is the network that brings them all together, and they share best practices, and they have a lot of things and tools and things that they share. They have a subgroup called Dementia-Friendly America, which is specifically for, of course, people with dementia and Alzheimer's and their family caregivers. And they just won an award for their holiday toolkit. So I thought, back in the good old days when I worked for Nintendo and Canon, we used to do Christmas in July, which is where we would go to New York and we'd invite all the press into a room in a hotel that we had where we had decked it out with holiday themed, but it was all about the new products that we were going to have for that, that holiday season. And we wanted them to write about it. And we certainly wanted to give, particularly at that time when magazines were still in existence. They needed a long lead time in order to write those articles. Anyway, it just kind of makes me laugh because now we've got a different kind of Christmas in July, which is this toolkit that Dementia Friendly America has that really is great. I looked through it. I like it. I might add a couple of additional things if I were writing it, but it's pretty comprehensive and you can download it. It's a free PDF. So it gives you kind of a checklist, but it tells you how do you create a dementia friendly holiday with your loved one if they've maybe been more recently diagnosed. So based on the stage of the disease that they're in, what are the things to think about? And of course, as we know, when you're doing something at home, it gets really tough because there's a lot of noise during the holidays because people are gathering, music is going on, bells are going off, right? Lots of cheers and all that kind of stuff, which doesn't affect us as we are younger and healthier, but as we get older, actually, just for a lot of older people, the noise factor can be really disruptive, and particularly for people who have dementia. All the sensory inputs can give you an overload where you just kind of freak out. And that can lead to things like agitation. We see a lot of agitation in, people who have dementia and Alzheimer's. So this is really great. And, some things to think about. Like, for instance, you probably don't want to have an event whether you're gathering friends and family that happens right around dusk. That is a time where your loved one could suffer from a sundowning event. It is very disruptive for both your loved one, for you, for your guests. So you want to avoid that dusk transition from light to dark, okay? Other things, you may want to have a separate private room where your loved one sits and people can come in and visit with them, maybe one or two people at a time, rather than them sitting in the middle of a busy, bustling, 20 people who have come over for a holiday event that you're hosting or whatever that is. Maybe you have your guests wear name tags so that your loved one doesn't feel silly asking the name of someone that they've met numerous times. They can just read the name tag and remember, oh, hi, Billy, or, hi, Louise, or whatever it is, rather than, feel bad about not remembering someone's name. And then making the time that your loved one is celebrating short, because again, as we get older, we get really exhausted anyway, but particularly when you have somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia, that exhaustion comes really fast. And then you really have to address it. It's not like, oh, mom, can you just suck it up for another hour and then we'll go or whatever. It's like, no, you've got to attend to it now. So you just want to make sure that you're keeping all those things in mind. And this is a great guide for that. And then I'm only touching the surface. There's like 20, 30, 40 things, as well as taking your loved one out during the holidays. Like maybe if you're going to a Christmas tree lighting or you're going to, services at the synagogue for, everything that's going on, for the different holidays that you celebrate. That's something that you have to think about with your loved one, because again, it's not the same with them. Being in large crowds can be very disconcerting. And so you want to just be mindful of that. So this is a really great guide. We're going to have a link to that on our episode guide page, but I thought it would be something good to bring up in well home design because, we also want to make sure that the home is designed to be age friendly, dementia friendly if we're bringing them to our home, or keeping in mind if we help them decorate in their home, what are the things we need to think about? So it's really great. I think I might even do an article because like I said, I saw a few things missing. and I'm not trying to be critical, but I do think there's now some things just in decor, right, that we can think about, or the music playlist, like making sure that the music playing is something that they remember from maybe their youth or their younger years or whatever it is. So we'll have all that, and we'll make sure that we keep you updated on that. But that's all we have for Well Home Design News. Now we're going to move into caregiving in the workplace. Hey, for workplace and caregiving, which is always what we like to focus on, because I do a lot of work with employers. But this is we're going to go back now to July, National Sandwich Generation Month. Care.com, which is a wonderful company that does a variety of different things. They have what I would call a caregiver marketplace where you could go and you could find senior care help. You can also find childcare help. You can find pet care help. Everybody you love, you can find the help for. But you go on to their marketplace, let's call it, and you bring up your criteria, and you'll get, it's almost like a matchmaking situation where they will bring up all the options that you have, and then you kind of negotiate, with that person on their rate and the times they come and all that. And then care.com kind of handles the back end. But in addition to that, they also offer things like care navigation services. And this is very often for their employer clients, where you're getting that expert who can help you. As I was just mentioning earlier, the area agencies on aging are great, but they don't really give you good insight recommendation. Like, they don't say this is better than this. They'll just give you a list of assisted living facilities in the place that you're looking. Now you still have to do the digging. You still have to figure out what's best, ask the right questions, that kind of thing. They can maybe sometimes help you with the questions to ask, but they don't really do that. A care navigation service is different. This is where you're going to tap into an expert, and they're going to tell you, look, here are all of the memory care in the area, but this one has a higher rating in the US News and World Report memory care. This one has this kind of customer rate, so they'll be able to give you a little bit more and maybe guide you a little bit better, which is, to me, that's like gold. I think that's the one thing I've seen, having been in this space now for about 25 plus years. That's the one thing we're all looking for, right? We don't like to spend a lot of time on the internet investigating things and then still come out not knowing what is best. What are the questions I should ask? What do I know that I don't, or, what don't I know that I should know? And that's where these types of navigation services. So what care.com did, which I think is excellent, is that service used to be offered mostly to their employer clients to help out those employees of those companies. But they broadened it. So now you can tap into it. So it is a fee for service, but still can save you a lot of time. And that can translate into hundreds or even thousands of dollars. So it's very valuable. What else do they do? They, as I said, they work with a lot of employers providing caregiving services in the workplace. I'm probably forgetting something, so forgive me, care.com, but really great company. So they come out with a lot of really great reports. And the most recent one that they just published is the Sandwich Generation Survey. So it was just published like a week or so ago. So this is very fresh. And what's really interesting about this is there have been some other studies that have been done on the sandwich generation. One that I just recently saw done by some researchers that to me was a little off, to be honest. And again, not to be critical of anyone's research, but it said there's like 2.4 million sandwich generation caregivers in the US. Let's say it's more like 18 million. It's a much bigger number. And so I don't know. I have to dig into that research study. I just saw it before I came on air, and I thought, wow, that seems really off. So maybe they were looking at just a certain cohort or a certain geographic region or something. But, believe me, the National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP, which came out with the seminal US, Caregiving in the US report last year, they're the ones who said, look, it's about 18 million. Because it's, I can't remember if it's 23%, 29%, whatever, of the overall 63 million caregivers are sandwich generation. And of course, for those of you who are listening, if you haven't listened to my episodes from the past, sandwich generation is defined as those caregivers who are caring for children, typically under 18, but it could still be college age kids that you're still really pretty much taking care of. And now simultaneously you're caring for a parent or an in-law or maybe a favorite aunt or a grandparent. So it's another older loved one, and you're kind of squeezed, right? You're sandwiched between these two generations needing your emotional, your physical, and your financial support. So anyway, so care.com dropped this great survey looking at these 18 million Americans who are sandwich generation. And, a lot of these people are also in what we would call their earning years, right? Those are your critical earning years where you're racking up the Social Security points and your Medicare points by being employed and also getting self-satisfaction, right? You're pursuing hopefully a passion in your work, and it's not just a job. But whatever it is, it's creating this lifestyle for you, and you're the driver of that. And so this is all happening while sandwich generation is wanting to focus on their careers and their jobs and their peak earning years and all that. So they've really got a challenge juggling all these things. So here's what they did. They surveyed 1,000 sandwich generation caregivers. Great. As I've told you, 1,000 is our threshold for saying something is truly valid. Um, and despite a lot of challenges, which I'm going to take you through, here's what I thought was really inspiring. Almost 100% of all of these sandwich generation caregivers said, but you know what? I'm really learning something. I'm gaining personal growth. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I thought, how lovely to not only be able to respond to the challenges and the responsibilities that you've added into your life that are making it hard, but also to have that mindset that, but you know what? There is a balance here because I'm getting a lot of rewards. So responsibility versus rewards is something we all look at, right? To know that you can have a balance even while caregiving and caregiving for two generations is really inspirational. So that's one of the things I loved about the results of the survey. But let me give you some of the other takeaways. So here was interesting. The average age of the sandwich generation caregiver is 34 years old in this survey. Now that's almost a decade or more younger than just all caregivers, right? If you do all caregivers, I think the average age is still around 47 years old. So it's, that Gen X member, but this is getting more into also millennials, right? So it's a younger person. The average time spent caring for children and older loved ones at the same time, which is what would make you sandwich generation, is 6.4 years. That's 2 years longer than the average time spent for just, again, all caregivers, which is about 4.5 years. So whether you're a spousal caregiver, whether you're caring for an older parent or in-law or grandparent, it's typically around 4.5 years. Now that's the average. If you're caring for someone with dementia or Alzheimer's, it could be 9 years is the average. Could be 20 plus years, depending on when they're diagnosed. So again, we have a wide range of how long you spend in that caregiving role, but just know this, no matter which one you fit into, it is a marathon, not a sprint. Okay. Typically, this is not over in weeks or even months. You will be years in your caregiving role. And that's why you need to pace yourself and make sure you're getting your me time and you're getting that balance, which we're going to talk about in a minute. 85% of the sandwich generation in this survey were completely unprepared for their caregiving role. Okay. That is not encouraging. Because we probably know they were ready for the parent role. They were ready to take care of the baby and the children. What they weren't ready for was the senior care piece. So we've got to do a better job balancing that for these sandwich generation members. And I think the responsibility for that comes in a lot of ways. It comes from all of our inputs. Our news sources need to focus more on senior care than elder care. They do a lot of stories around child caregiving and all these other things, but very little, to be honest, if you measured it all, on senior care. In the employer space, we need to have those be equal. We should not have any more programs or, quite frankly, benefits for people who have children versus people who are caring for an older parent. In fact, you're probably going to wind up having even more people playing the senior caregiver role than the children role. We know a lot of people are delaying parenting or deciding not to be parents. We know that the fertility rates are down in the US, but the longevity rates are up, which means what? Well, it means we're going to have less children than older parents to care for. And that's what we're facing right now. So from a perspective of an HR person or, somebody who's planning things that are programs that support people at work or otherwise in the community, we've got to make sure that that senior care role is as equal. Now, this is the one that really gets me. 80% of the sandwich generation drop their me time in order to care for their loved ones. Not a surprise. That's why I wrote Me Time Monday. Because I wanted people to not only, my mission was, I wanted you to understand as a caregiver that everything seems to come crashing down, and the one ball you're going to drop if you're juggling all these balls is the ball that says me. And that's the ball we don't want you to drop, because that could have a cascade of health issues, both physical and mental for you. But it's hard, right? Because you're in the middle of kind of a crisis. Typically, we don't plan ahead enough for senior care, so we enter it in a little bit of a crisis. So how do we help you not drop that ball? And that's what Me Time Monday was all about. It was about bringing that balance back. It was about spending just 7 minutes or less, which I think is doable, even in a crazy, crazy chaotic caregiving situation. You can grab 7 minutes here and there. And also, I wanted you to understand more about your brain, because I feel like a lot of us don't really understand about not just brain health, but how our brains work. What are the happiness hormones that we have charge over? How do we make those happiness hormones work for us? How do we get past societal trends like being on social media all the time and doom scrolling? How do we get away from that? How do we go from FOMO, fear of missing out, to joy of missing out? So that was what the book was all about. And when I see this 80% drop their me time, I'm like, okay, that's my mission, gang. How do I get those people back into the loop? Because again, as I said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. They can't give up their me time for 6.4 years. That's ridiculous. You're not going to survive. So we're going to help you. So we got it. That's where the focus is. And that's where I'm trying to work with employers on focusing more on that mental health, that me time part that is so essential. Here's another one. 82% are financially strained by cost of care. No kidding. I mean, if you're outlaying cash for 3 generations, let's just say your parents didn't save as well, so you're digging into your own pocket to help them with retirement or long-term care needs. Now you got your kids, maybe you have a college fund or not, who knows, but you're still financially responsible for them. It's just crazy. I honestly don't know how people do it who are in the sandwich generation. And so many headlines, by the way, have been expressing that, how the sandwich generation is just overwhelmed, hit a wall when it comes to the financial cost of care. And it's because of that elder care piece, because the costs are so ridiculous for long-term care, and even getting towards end of life and all that, and what Medicare will cover and not, and all these other nuances that we don't know anything about. So we need to start the education earlier on long-term care. We need to get families planning. This is something I've been working a lot with the financial services. I've worked with a lot of different companies on really not only educating their wealth advisors who are doing the financial plans, but also helping to educate the clients on asking certain questions earlier in life and making sure that you've got a plan that takes a look at what that potential could be, because you don't want to have it again hit in a crisis and now you don't have much of a runway. You don't have all that time to be able to save or make plans or do this or whatever it is. So so that one is really pretty big. And just as an FYI, because there's been a lot in the news lately about the Trump accounts for kids, boy, if you're sandwich generation and you've just had your baby, or you've got those younger kids, I think, that can still tap into the Trump accounts, do it. Because I looked at the numbers and I thought, if you could discipline yourself to not touch it, and if you could just add a little bit. I mean, I wish I was more financially savvy throughout my years of earning, and I wish I had taken classes or had someone sit me down, because I do feel I left a lot on the table or a lot behind. And I really encourage people to, to embrace these types of things that are going to help you in the long run. It's really hard because we're also focused on the present, right? We're focused on today. We're focused on the trip we want to take, in 6 months, or whatever it is. We're not focused on, well, 20 years from now or 25 years from now. It's hard to get people to really look that far down the road and be really, really interested unless you're into the financial side of things and you're just really good and disciplined from the get-go. But it's really important to look at all of your opportunities for savings or where, things like the government can help. So all of these things are not positives, let's say. They're not like happy things that are happening to sandwich generation caregivers, but 99% of the sandwich generation caregivers in this report found that they are building their personal growth. They said, I'm learning patience, I'm learning empathy, I'm learning how to juggle multiple things, multitask, I'm learning how to research things. I'm learning how to be, more present with my loved one or put things in perspective in my life. And those are what we used to call soft skills, particularly in the employer lingo. And now what's happening is a lot of employers are looking for these skills. They're essential for leadership. You want to lead a team, you need to be empathetic. You need to know how to get people to collaborate. You need to be patient sometimes. You need to help people, see the way or whatever. And so a lot of these skills are becoming very valuable to employers. And it's something we really want caregivers to acknowledge, because shouldn't be something that you just kind of, yeah, I did get that out of caregiving. No, it should go on your resume. It should be part of what you're bringing to the party in terms of your skills and what you can offer. So in some ways, I think caregivers can get a leg up, whether they stay at work while they're caregiving or if they take maybe a small hiatus to care for their loved one full time and they come back. That should be something that they should use in terms of that reentry. And then ultimately, I think there's two responsibilities here when it comes to workplace and caregiving. Yes, employers need to, do a reality check. You should probably be doing an annual care audit, something I always recommend when I'm talking to HR, chief HR executives and officers. Do an annual care audit so you really know what your workplace is experiencing, and do it so that they feel free to answer the questions without any kind of repercussion. So you probably want to maybe do it with an outside group or something. But that's really important just to understand because every workplace is different. We can't say it's all one size fits all. We have shift workers, part-time workers, hourly workers, in addition to what always gets the attention, which is kind of more the 9-to-5 office worker. You've got waitresses and you've got hairdressers and you've got truck drivers. You've got all kinds of people who are all caregiving, and they're all in different types of employment and jobs and things like that. So you have to think that through. But we have to acknowledge it, and then we have to go from being what I call care aware to caring culture. And caring culture means you got to walk the walk. You got to talk the talk and walk the walk. You can't just do checklist stuff. You have to see how that's impacting your workforce. You have to make sure that you are helping to educate. If the what was it? 85% said I'm unprepared. Okay. 85% are unprepared. That's a role that employers can play. They can help prepare their employees for caregiving, even if they're not in the middle of it, which again, a lot of people don't focus on it until they're in the middle of the crisis. But if we can start to shift in the same way that we help you plan for your retirement and we give you avenues to that, in the same way we help you plan for your health and we give you benefits for being healthier or whatever it is, this is another avenue that we can help you plan for, which is caregiving. And we can give you education. We might even be able to give you some tools that can help. So there's a lot of things employers can do. Now, can employers solve everything? No, of course not. And they shouldn't have to. They should be focused on their bottom line. So they need to make sure that whatever they're doing is going to be effective for the bottom line. but they do have a role. On the other side, we as individuals in society also have a responsibility, and that is to acknowledge the longevity that is happening in our society. People are living longer, but very often our lifespan, how long we live, doesn't equal our health span, how long we're healthy. A lot of people are going to spend 20 to 30 years battling a chronic illness where they need help. And that's where the caregivers come in. So we've got to have these discussions. We got to bring this forward, do the education, keep it front and center. Don't just do it once a year for National Family Caregiver Month. I can give you observances all years long that you can relate to in terms of helping people to understand, and keep it in front of people, because if they don't pay attention now because they're not a caregiver, the minute it happens, they're going to be looking for information. And so from an employer perspective, it's just great to have all that established, have that in place, and be playing that role that can help overall in society. So shifting gears from that great survey, we're talking about happiness. I mentioned the 4 happiness hormones, which are in my book. Again, just really quickly, oxytocin, love, trust, bonding, endorphins, which is kind of your personal morphine, if you will. It's your feel-good hormone. Serotonin, which is your mood booster that starts in your microbiome, your gut. And dopamine, the reward hormone, which you can harness for good or bad. It's up to you if you want to be, good or evil, angel or devil. But what about happiness just overall as we age? Is it money? Is it accomplishing, that you've made your first trillion, like Elon, or is it your quality and strength of your relationships? And I think we probably all know the answer, which is it's the quality and strength of your relationships. Harvard has spent 85 years studying this, and the one thing they found that is the secret to all the people they've looked at who have lived longer, healthier, and happier is they have at least one confidant in their life, someone they can turn to at any time with anything, not be judged, and just be supported and feel like somebody's got my back, and the quality of the relationships. Now, a lot of us feel like, oh, I've got, 30,000 followers on Instagram. You probably know 10 of them personally. I mean, it's not about social media followers, by the way. It is about the people that you interact with on a personal basis, usually in person, and what is the quality of those relationships. And as we age, we know we typically do prune them. My friend, my BFF, and I laugh because over the years we feel like we've just cut people out of our lives, and it seems kind of cruel, right? It seems like, wow, but the relationship just wasn't working. It wasn't simpatico. And the older you get, you're like, why do I spend my time? I'd rather spend more time with my BFF than this toxic frenemy that I've got, right? So that does happen as we get older. We just start to get a little bit more, what would you call it? I don't know, decisive or something. Anyway, so what this new paper, or what this new study found, is that certainly, poverty is going to be, it's going to affect your happiness. Nobody is happy in poverty. It's soul sucking, right? So you do have to have a certain level of ability to live a good life. Doesn't mean you're living high on the hog or whatever, but you have to be able to maintain a good life and a home and all of those things. But once you have that level, and it's not really that high necessarily, it's about how wealth and well-being is influenced in your retirement satisfaction. And so this was taken from the Health and Retirement Study, with over, it was 5,900 participants, or respondents, if you will, and they took a look at the data. And what they found, okay, no big surprise, supports the Harvard Development Study. Social health is number one. What does that mean? Social health. Social health is quality of your relationships. The other thing, too, is that one of the things I learned as a gerontologist is there's a great psychologist, Eric Erickson, who studied the 8 stages of life. He defined these 8 stages. And the stage that a lot of people find themselves in kind of more midlife, late midlife, and he has the good and the bad. Like some people choose this, other people choose this. is a stage that I think it's stage 7, and it's either you're stagnant, you don't know what to do, maybe you've retired, you don't know what to do with yourself, you don't have any passion, you know, you're not socially engaged with volunteering or doing anything like that, you're stagnating, or generativity. And that is you get in there, you mix it up, you give it back, you learn new things, you volunteer to help others. Uh, you're a caregiver for an older loved one. All of those things can happen in those stages, and it's just really how you look at life. And some of it is a little bit of that optimism versus pessimism that I also wrote about in my book and that I talk about a lot. I think that people who have more of that optimistic outlook, they're seeking, right? They're still hopeful, they're seeking, they're looking forward. People who are pessimistic are looking down, they're not seeking, they almost have a barrier. They don't want to hear it. Everything's bad. It's Tigger versus Eeyore, right? If you're a, a Winnie the Pooh fan. And you have to just kind of decide who you are. Now, you can be an Eeyore, but you can adopt some Tigger uh, thought processes that would help, because we don't change our personalities dramatically, but we can decide there are some things that are like the silver linings that the Sandwich Generation survey from care.com showed. 99% of those people said, yeah, this is really tough. I don't have me time. I don't have money. It's impacting my job. It's impacting everything. But you know what? I'm also growing personally. So they found the positivity in it. And I think that's where we all want to be. And that's a great segue into our pop culture segment, because I'm going to tell you how optimism is helping one of our heroes to address a really devastating diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. So that's next. So our pop culture segment is again focused on Alzheimer's disease, and one of those stories that you just wish you hadn't read or hadn't happened. And it happens to deal with our heroes. When we think about heroes, particularly if they're celebrities, you think about Christopher Reeve, who had that devastating spinal cord injury, or Michael J. Fox, who at such a young age was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and how gracefully they both navigated, Christopher Reeve, of course, is gone, but Michael J. Fox still navigating their lives. Well, we've got another hero who is now going to join the 7 million Americans who are living with Alzheimer's disease, and that is Captain Chesley, Sully Sullenberger. And for those of you who don't remember him, in 2009, he miraculously, I mean, it really was divine intervention, I think, in some ways, but it also has to do with something that I'll tell you about. But he was able to manage landing on the Hudson River a plane with 155 passengers on board. About 2 minutes into the flight, they were taking off from LaGuardia in New York, and they had geese who got caught in the engines and shut both engines down. Sometimes you can fly with one engine, and that happens to a lot of pilots out there, but both engines were shut down. He had literally 208 seconds, which I still, it just makes me to decide, well, what am I going to do? And to save the lives. And what was, again, so miraculous is he did. He did. He landed on that Hudson River with that huge airplane and all those people. Nobody died. I think maybe a couple people got some cuts and scrapes and stuff like that. But I mean, absolute miracle. And for those of us who watched it live on the news, it was like amazing, because when an airplane's going down, it's never good news. Anyway, and then Tom Hanks, of course, who every man wants Tom Hanks to play him in a movie because he's the total hero. He did play Sully in a movie just a few years ago. Well, no, 10 years ago. I think it was 2016 or something like that. Anyway, all that aside, Sully had just come out a couple weeks ago in People magazine and announced that he does have early stage Alzheimer's. So he is still in the stage where he understands things, and he is, taking life as it is day by day. Things are still pretty much the same. The only thing he really said he recognized over the last year is that he had a photographic, sharp memory. And he was starting to like, the name of this or the name of that, which wasn't usual for him. And also, he was thinking he's in good shape and taking good care of himself. Is this really normal aging or is there something else going on here? So he did finally get his diagnosis, for which we're very sorry. But he's going to shed a light on the disease, I think, in the same way that like Glenn Campbell did and many others who have been diagnosed who are looking at it as a hopeful journey and one that they can help educate other people about, which is always something that I appreciate with celebrities. Very often, I think celebrities are not people that we see as heroes as much anymore, but when they can be heroic in their lives and help us understand things, I think that's really great. Now, I have a special love for Sully because in my Me Time Monday book, each one of my chapters of the 7 wellness elements of life, I started with a little story. And so my chapter on the was it the emotional? Yeah, emotional. I'm just looking at my book. The emotional wellness chapter, I did the story of Sully. And here's something you may not know. So of course, devastating. 208 seconds, got to make a decision. How am I going to land this freaking plane and where? Couldn't get back to any of the airports fast enough because they were going down fast. Had to land it in the river. And he did it. And how did he do it? And I think that's the thing that I found so fascinating with him is my love in my psychology courses when I was going through to become a gerontologist were in the area of what we call flow theory with Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who is the researcher who coined that theory of flow. And what flow is basically where you're combining passion, purpose, positivity, and you're just in a different state. And a lot of athletes, like Olympic or professional athletes, or I talked in the book about my favorite ballerina, Alessandra Ferri, they just somehow, some of them, not all, but the ones that are really good, the ones that are at the top of their game, they experience flow because they go into this other state where they know they can do things that are almost unhuman, otherworldly, if you will. And their performances speak for themselves, right? Well, Sully was a glider pilot. That was his passion. He loved flying gliders. And, for most pilots who are trained, when the engines cut out, you're going into panic because you're in free fall. But for a glider pilot, that is your natural state. You're gliding. You're among the clouds. Sully had expressed it as it's meditative solace. And so what happened with Sully, and he had the personality for it too, he was very disciplined. He was very unflappable, from I read his bio and everything. But what he did is he went into that flow state where he very quickly assessed, okay, what's going on? What do I need to do? Okay. I know I can do this. And that's the one thing that really struck me is that he did talk about fear. He said, like my heart was just falling through the floor. But at the same time, he harnessed that flow to give him the positive, you can do this. You know how to land a glider pilot or a glider plane. You've done this. You understand the winds and all the things going on. And anyway, I bring it up because for many of us who get stuck in negativity or feeling overwhelmed, it's a really hard discipline. It's kind of like learning your breathing exercises or learning meditation. But to get into flow, when you combine passion, purpose, positivity, I can do this. When you get to that point, it's really miraculous. And that is, I don't even know if Sully knows he was in flow theory or in flow state, but he was. Just trust me. Everything I've studied about flow state, he was there. But anyway, I love that I put the story in the book now. And unfortunately, now we have to write a new chapter for him, which is how he's going to navigate this journey through Alzheimer's. And knowing the strength of his family, particularly his wife, Lori, who he's been married to for, I think, almost 40 years. They have children and grandchildren. And he is talking about how that is going to be his strength in going forward. But I wanted to just share with you. So when he landed that plane on the Hudson, he was 57 and a half years old. He's now 75. So it hasn't been really that long, about 15 years, right, or so, since he was the hero on the Hudson to now having this devastating diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. Um, he did struggle, he says in the People magazine article, he struggled with what do I say? How do I say it? When do I say it? Mostly, when do I say it? He did wait a year after the diagnosis, which I think it's admirable because they always say when you have something devastating in your life, you have the loss of a loved one or whatever it is, you should go through 4 seasons. You should go through a whole year. The 4 seasons gives you enough time to evaluate, to get to a point of really understanding now where you're at. So he did wait about a year. Um, and his quote was, "This new phase of my life has challenged what it means to be of service." And the answer is to speak up. It is my hope that by sharing this, other families living in the shadows with this disease will feel they too can step forward. That's, again, that's what a hero does, right? They lead. And he's gonna help lead the continued focus on this. Now he has early stage. I want to just make sure you understand. Early stage, of course, is different from early onset. Early onset, which you may hear about, is something that actually is mostly genetically linked. It only affects about 5% of all of those who have Alzheimer's. So only it's a small percentage, but it is typically genetically linked, and typically you are diagnosed before the age of 60. When you're diagnosed later in life, that is more the traditional aging onset. But there's also stages of the disease as it progresses and becomes worse. You can be in early stage, mid stage, or end stage. If you go to the Alzheimer's Association website, they break it down even further and more granular into 7 stages of the disease. But if you think about early stage, he's still functioning. He's still obviously the Sully that we know. He just may have certain memory loss. And he said also his sleep is really disturbed. So he's being affected by that circadian rhythm disruption that we know all those Alzheimer's patients get. And so what are the warning signs? I wanted to just share this with you because he talked about how he felt a year before he even got his diagnosis, so that would have been 2 years ago, that things were starting to not feel normal. Now, there is normal cognitive decline as we age, and again, it's because if you think about your brain as a computer, you've got a whole bunch of files in your brain, and that's everything you've learned, every conversation you've had, every memory you've enjoyed. All of that information is in your brain, and most of it is stored. Some of it gets tossed out during the night when we're doing the washing of the brain and getting the toxic stuff out or the stuff that isn't really all that important. But mostly we're keeping all those files in our brain. And again, when we need to go find that file, it takes us a little bit more time than someone who might be in their 20s who doesn't have as many files in their brain because they don't have as much life experience. They sharp, sharp, sharp. And many of us, by the way, are sharp, sharp, sharp throughout our lives. We can really run that computer in our head fast and find that file. But think about lots of files, don't find it quite as fast. That's normal. That is normal brain health aging. Okay. What is different about Alzheimer's? So there are 10 early warning signs that the Alzheimer's Association, again, has on their website, alz.org. We'll have that on our episode guide page link. But for instance, you bump into a high school friend you haven't seen in 40 years and you kind of forget their name. Normal. You forget your son's name or your grandson's name. Not normal. Okay. That's Alzheimer's. Losing your keys. Okay. I have done that several times, I will admit. And I don't have Alzheimer's. But putting my keys in the freezer, which I have not done, that would be a sign. So it's doing things that are abnormal. It's not traditional, like losing my keys just because I misplaced them for a minute or I was stressed out and distracted because I was taking a phone call and put them down somewhere. No, this is, I put my keys in a really weird place that, like, why did you do that? Suddenly withdrawing from social activities. This is a big one because if you're mostly social and get into situations and you're interacting and talking and all of that, but all of a sudden you're starting to withdraw or you don't want to go. Like if mom or dad is pushing back on going to their regular bridge game or lawn bowling or whatever they used to really enjoy doing, and now they don't want to go, it's because they have said something wrong. People have looked at them oddly and they know something's off. They can feel it because they know. And they just don't want to be put in that position. So they just withdraw. If I'm not social, nobody will look at me oddly or think something's wrong. So that's a big one to watch out for. Getting lost in the neighborhood or a familiar route, like going to your faith-based service or something you do all the time, you've done throughout your life. Now all of a sudden you get lost or you can't find your way home. Big sign. Difficulty learning new things or you mix up your language a little bit. So this is aphasia. Language jumbling is what Bruce Willis started with. So he was, just using wrong words, wrong consonants for thing. Anyway, it's just where your communication skills start to deteriorate, and it's language. So you want to look for that, but also you don't want to learn anything new because you can't keep the steps in your head. The other thing that I wrote about in my book, one of the research studies that I found was people who used to love reading, historical like biographies, or even fiction where they have to follow the storyline, they will stop reading those types of books and or stop reading altogether. And the reason why is because they can't remember the storyline day to day. They can't pick it up where they left off and remember who that character is or who that person is they're reading about. Personality or mood changes. Now, this is a hard one because this can also be related to other types of diseases that could be devastating, and we don't want to share it yet with anybody. But, if your loved one was, a teetotaler and now all of a sudden they're drinking a lot, or if, again, they're withdrawing and they used to be very social, those are all things you want to look for. They have problems solving problems. So they don't know how to get to how do I solve this? And difficulty remembering schedules is another one. They miss doctor appointments or other, like, you didn't show up for lunch. What happened to you? That's a big sign too. So those are all things you want to be on the lookout for that aren't normal. Normal aging, as I said, is, you might forget that lunch appointment, but you don't forget it for weeks. Or the person's probably going to call you, but you might forget it like, oh my gosh, that's right. Okay, I got to get ready and get over there for my lunch appointment or whatever it is. Um, Now, one thing to know as a family caregiver is after 65, when your loved one's on Medicare, their annual wellness exam, which is covered, at least 80% is covered. You might have a 20% out of pocket, but it will include a cognitive exam. So just know that. You should ask your loved one about it. If the physician that your loved one has doesn't give it, that's not good. But I think most of the primary care are up to speed by now. What they aren't necessarily up to speed on is being able to um, really effectively diagnose the disease just based on what they're looking at. They really have to refer you to a specialist, which is a neurologist, where you're going to get your MRIs or fMRIs and PET scans and all that, and go through some other, maybe some blood biomarker testing and things like that. You really need to get to a specialist because the primary care, they're still trying to get caught up on the education around Alzheimer's, which is something now that they're seeing more and more, and they weren't necessarily trained on through medical school or their practice. But you can take your own test if you want to, no matter what age you are, even if you want a baseline. You can go to mybrainguide.org. Now, this is not a diagnostic test. This is not a test that will tell you your Alzheimer's. All it will tell you is your brain health. It'll give you a score and it'll say, you're a little bit lower than average for your age group or whatever. Or you're perfect, things are great, or whatever it is. But it's not a diagnostic. It's more of a, okay, some things don't look right in the test that you just took. Here's some articles to read because they do give you some next step solutions, but it's something you should take to your doctor. And you should say, listen, I did this online test. I'm a little worried about it. What do you think? But just know that this test is very well thought of because it was developed by a lot of really great clinical and scientific researchers in the Alzheimer's dementia community. They were very thoughtful about creating this test. So it's not just one of those silly, I don't know, like other tests that you can take. And then again, if you have been listening to this episode, you know that changing some lifestyle factors may reduce your risk. So think about that. If you if you aren't adhering to some of those lifestyle factors, particularly the ones that we talked about with hypertension, obesity, moving more, that type of thing, social, of course, social health, not smoking, all of those things are going to, have a big effect on your risk. And then one of the things I loved about Sully in the article I read about him, which we'll have a link on the episode guide page, is that, again, going back to flow theory, part of that is positivity, right? That's what brings you happiness is positivity. And the research bears this out. The people who are most optimistic live longer and happier and healthier. And so ever the optimist, because that is part of his makeup, he knew he could land the plane. He was positive. He said, as scared as I was, right? And as like, oh my, what, how am I going to do? He knew he could do it. And that's what gave him the strength to do it. So that same optimism is how he's going to navigate this new challenge of Alzheimer's. And his quote was, though it may impact my memory of the past, this diagnosis will not prevent me from looking forward to and appreciating my future. And that's a lovely way to, I think, end this story about him, because again, he's going to hopefully bring a lot of attention to this. We wish him and his family the best. We are keeping our fingers crossed with all the great research that you just heard about, because we're getting closer and closer to some breakthroughs. There's just so many great people working on this worldwide. And so we're going to congratulate Sully, because he said he's looking forward to celebrating. He's going to be inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame in September. So you've got to always look forward, even if things seem really daunting. And I think that's a good note for us as family caregivers as well, is to have that optimism, have that hope. Look for the happiness that you can find every day. It's tough on some days, but it's going to help us out in the long run. That's a wrap for Caregiving Club Newscast this week. We hope you enjoyed these news segments. You can email us at info@caregivingclub.com to let us know a news story we should cover, or leave us a comment on our YouTube page. And don't forget to subscribe to our Caregiving Club YouTube channel to get all the caregiving news every other week, as well as our other content, our Me Time Monday Self-Care in 7 Minutes weekly videos, and our Caregiving Club On Air podcasts, which are available on our Caregiving Club YouTube channel, as well as Apple, Amazon, Spotify, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, and other podcast listening channels. Find out more about Sherri and Caregiving Club at caregivingclub.com. Take care and stay well.